Hello and welcome to this episode of English with Matthew, where we're going to talk about report writing. So the thing about report writing, and by this I mean all kinds of reports. It could be children's school reports, it could be a formal report on behalf of a school or an institution. But the thing is, when you're writing a report, it really places peculiar demands on our language, and some people get quite tangled up in the process. They lose their own sense of what they're trying to communicate because they're not sure whether they've mastered the form of the report. The language of a report is slightly different from that of an academic essay because a report is a formal document, it's an institutional kind of communication, and it is often a legal document. So we do have to be careful with the language that we use. So let's be clear at least about our goals with report writing. We are trying to be clear and direct, always. So the report may not be delivering good news, but that's not a reason to try to obscure that through strange or arcane language. And we need to be precise and accurate. One of the biggest problems that crops up in report writing is people switching terminology, using different terms as if they are equivalent, when in fact some terms are legal terms and you can't just substitute anything. You have to stick to the right terms. And we want to be fact and evidence-based. A report is not necessarily the time to be flaunting one's opinions about things. You really want to lead with the facts if you're going to be persuasive and if you're going to effectively communicate what you have to get across. So we also want to be unbiased and moderate in our language and tone. It's not a place to get kind of worked up about things. Okay. And also, report writing is a great time to remember that writing is a social act. You don't have to do this on your own. You have other people who maybe have done these kinds of reports before, can show you examples, or can read over what you're writing and give you a sense of how an audience might respond to it. So ask your institution if they have examples so you can pick up on the tone and style considered appropriate, because your institution's reports may differ from the one up the road. They may have a certain kind of message they're trying to put across in a certain way, and you need to fit into that. So in trying to be clear and direct, we want to think carefully about terminology and just make a decision. Be clear whether you are deliberately trying to be evaluative. That is, are you trying to pass a professional judgment at a certain moment in this report, or are you delivering facts to your audience and allowing them to judge in the first instance? So look at this sentence. The children's performance in the first term was outstanding. Okay, well, just be aware that that is you in full evaluative mode. That is you passing judgment, and you're bypassing the reader in terms of their relationship to the evidence. They may not trust you because you've started on that footing. You might be on securer ground if you started with the facts, put the scores out there, put the evidence out there that shows how terrific they were. Okay, because otherwise a reader may say, and what do you mean exactly by outstanding? You're kind of raising questions and putting up targets for people to shoot at that you don't necessarily want them to take aim at. What about this instead? The children's test performance in the first term revealed a 2% increase across all standardized numeracy assessments and a 4% increase across all standardized literacy assessments when contrasted with the comparable cohort 1 year earlier. You get the idea. This is just leading with a fact that kind of puts the reader in the situation of saying, well, that's hard to argue with. So being clear and direct then lets your reader decide, fine, now I'll judge whether that is outstanding. So words like outstanding, marvelous, terrific, these are very judgmental terms, and they're not necessary usually if you stick to the facts. There's also a tendency in some reports to abandon all pretense of trying to communicate in a vital, engaging way with the reader. Some reports just become so formal, so dry, so just trotting out the numbers that it's almost as if they've not really wanted to get a vital message across to the reader. That is because I think some report writers are simply trying to cover themselves by saying, I told you all about it, it was in my last report, but they're secretly kind of hoping you didn't read it. That's all the more reason to go through those reports with a fine-tooth comb if you feel like they're trying to put you off. So meanwhile, nobody can actually remember ever reading it because it was so verbose or unclear. That's not a game we want to engage with. If you have a message to deliver, be it good or bad, you want to do it clearly, directly, and honestly. So we want to avoid writing in English, and if you haven't seen my video on English or read Ken McCrory's book where he talks about English, which is this chronically bad type of writing that doesn't communicate much. So we want to avoid English, and we want to keep our word choice precise and our sentence structure clear and direct at all times. At the same time, reports are not the place for casual informality. So look, there's a balance here between being clear and direct, not using unnecessarily big terms if they're not required, but also not falling into a kind of casual tone that's going to sound as if you're not aware of the legal status or the formal status of this document you're writing. So we're probably not going to write this. Your Bobby's performance in the end of your assessments, well, it was just brill. He smashed it. No. I mean, that may be the message you would really like to communicate from person to person with the parents and say, listen, oh, I was very excited how he did. That's not the job of a report. This report is an official record, okay? So any kind of sloppy, casual, biased, or sort of tone-deaf report could end up confusing or even upsetting your audience. And you've probably heard stories of that, of parents coming in not pleased with a certain term or word that was used to describe their child. So in keeping an unbiased and moderate tone, we wouldn't say things like, well, you know, there was just a ridiculous number of careless mistakes made by this student in the end of term exam. So obviously, ridiculous, careless, careless you might get away, I don't know, but you just have to be aware you're venturing into quite judgy territory and drifting away from facts and evidence. But there's another phrase in this sentence that would bother me aside from ridiculous and careless, and that is, this student. That sounds so impersonal. And I know that sometimes we have to produce a large quantity of reports, but by talking about children in this way or students in this way, it can suggest that all they are to us are their results, that they're kind of faceless people. And we need to try to keep that personal connection built into the language. So in trying to be precise and accurate and fact and evidence-based, we're going to keep the language professional and factual, and we're going to ease up on the judgy bit, the editorializing. Let's see what we have here. A review of Laura's numeracy test results in the second term suggests she has a firm grasp of all the basic concepts and strategies covered in class, but she has a tendency to rush through work and then fails to take the required time to review answers and steps taken. Now that would be something that you could probably produce the evidence for and say, I think that's pretty fact-based, and it's a pretty personal, individual account of how Laura operates. So I've made the case that I know Laura, and I know how she's operating as an individual human being, and I think I've maybe kept it professional without being too judgy. So this level of precision is of particular importance in relation to documents that really do have legal significance, such as an individualized education plan or an IEP. And this is a little bit of text I've taken from the National Autistic Society, and they remind us that an IEP is a document that helps teaching staff to plan for your child. You know, they're talking to the parents about this. It should include strategies to help them learn and be used to review their progress. These are all elements that need to be contained in an IEP. The IEP should be guided by your child's profile, records, assessments, their strengths, their statement, the other key document, the statement of special educational needs if they have one. It should help your child access and engage with the curriculum. IEPs are different for each child, so we don't crank them out like carbon copies. Okay. It should set out what should be taught, how it should be taught, how often it should be taught, and there isn't a standard format for IEPs. Isn't that interesting? You know, we're dealing with human beings. Yes, it's a formal report document, but they should respond to the individual differences between pupils. They generally include details of short-term targets, the additional support that's been put in place to help your child meet them. The document should be accessible and understandable. So if you're using complex terms or if you're using acronyms, you know what educationalists are like for acronyms. I mean, there it is. I put in IEP. The first use of IEP, you should spell out the entire phrase and then make sure the reader's with you every time you repeat that acronym. Okay. It should be the document should be agreed by you and wherever possible your child, as it's important for the whole family to be involved at this stage. So look at this as one type of report that has to walk that fine line between a kind of formal legal status and a personal, direct, human form of communication. Let's talk about sentence structure for a second. Jenny has performed well across most of her GCSE mock exams. Jenny has performed well in a range of extracurricular activities, including the debating society. Jenny had you see what's happening here? Somebody has a stock set of sentences that they're kind of copying and pasting into reports, and they're repeating, well, here they're repeating the exact same phrase, Jenny has performed, but it doesn't have to repeat the same words. Sometimes it can just be a repetition of that sentence structure. Student name, verb. You know, sentence variety, mixing up the order and the structure of sentences is one way of communicating to people, I'm still alive here. I'm still attentive to the individuality of the person I'm writing about. And also, remember in writing these reports that your own literacy skills are on display. May I quote one principal's view, someone who communicated this to me recently, and said, you know, for the teacher being the chief writer in the class, someone who teaches writing, leads children in writing, the teacher's setting an example of how it ought to be done with every report they write. If his or her level of basic literacy is not up to speed, then how can people have confidence in the work that's being taught in the classroom? If their style is less than fluent, or, and here's what we were just talking about, if it looks like a copy and paste job, then how are families to put their faith in this person's skills as a professional? They're under an obligation to upskill themselves here in areas that they've missed out on in their own education. So that's just what you're doing by watching these videos. It's something we always have to work on. We always have to catch ourselves out. And of course, you know, because I'm talking about writing, you probably have already spotted I've maybe made an error somewhere, I've made a mistake. That sets me up as a target. People love pointing those things out when I do them. We have to always be on our toes and on our guard with this stuff. So yes, some reports are deadly to read because they're not really written in the spirit of genuine communication with an audience waiting to be engaged. It is possible to be formal and be clear and engaging. So I know what you mean. Some of them can be deadly to read, but some badly written reports can actually be deadly. I mean, there are people's lives at stake in these reports. If there's an important message that has to get through, you have to prioritize it. You have to put it at the top. You have to put it at the start of your sentence. Make sure that message gets through. Because you don't want to just be deadly to read. You don't want to be somebody who's deliberately working to bury and obscure information. You know, the T's and C's phenomenon, the terms and conditions. It's like, have you read through all of Apple's terms and conditions? No, you haven't, and they know you haven't. Don't write reports like that. Prioritize the important message that has to get through. I'll just end by talking about an example, a historic example of a moment when report writing did not communicate the key message, and this is the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. Look, if this situation teaches us anything, it's that if something is important, the language and the arguments made within a report need to land with their audience. They must connect and move the reader. What happened after the Space Shuttle Challenger, when people realized this ship exploded in midair, killing all aboard, people immediately wanted to find out what went wrong. Well, the fact is, some people in the chain of creating the Space Shuttle Challenger knew it was going to go wrong, and they told people it was going to go wrong. Why did the message not land? This man, for many years, we didn't know who he was. We knew there was somebody who had this knowledge, and he has come out into the public, Bob Ebling, who has said that, he said, I was one of the few that was really close to the situation. Had they listened to me and waited for a weather change, it might have been a completely different outcome. Because what Bob knew was that the seals, the O-rings in the engines, didn't work under a certain temperature. And he reported that information. But the way corporate language can become obscured and reports can be buried, that message didn't go to the top and it didn't land. It didn't have the impact that it could have. So when the inquiry was begun, this man, physicist Richard Feynman, he decided to get that message across in a more dramatic way. When the inquiry was underway, Feynman was actually seriously ill with cancer. He was reluctant to undertake the job, but he did so because he wanted to find the root cause and speak plainly to the public about his findings. So before going to Washington, he did his own investigation, and he became suspicious about the O-rings. And he said, once they go under a certain temperature, they become stiff and shrink. They don't necessarily keep a seal. And look at this. During a televised hearing, Feynman demonstrated how the O-rings became less resilient and subject to seal failures at ice-cold temperatures by immersing a sample of the O-ring material in a glass of ice water. While other members of the commission, they met with NASA and top management and so forth, Feynman sought out guys like Bob, the engineers and technicians, for the answers, and he became critical of NASA's safety culture. And he actually he put it in a C-clamp and showed that the C-clamp wouldn't grip this seal after it had been frozen in water. He said, this is a message, I have to demonstrate it in order to get the point across. So we have to remain formal. It's a legal environment. We have to keep our language clear and precise. I'm just asking that you write reports in such a way that the message you're trying to communicate will actually land. Please consider your reader and don't write impenetrable, unreadable reports. This idea of getting the main point across clearly is why academic articles, for example, begin with an abstract, because they put the significant results out there first, or the lack of, if they don't have good news to deliver, they put that out there first. So here's just a random sample of an article's abstract. This is someone looking at juniper berries to see whether they are good at repelling insects. And I highlighted in red, in the abstract, they said, we tested it, we compared it to commercial repellent, and showed that commercial repellent is more effective. However, this oil also has some insect repellent potential. There's the result. Now you can go off and read the whole study. But the news, which probably wasn't great for this study, is, wasn't that good, okay? But those are the facts stuck up there right in the front of the abstract. So the thing about this is, remember that whatever report you're writing, they are not mystery stories. The results don't come at the end, they come at the start. What comes after the results is a discussion of all the detail. But don't bury the news at the end of the report, okay? Because then your reader is just hanging out. I can't wait to see how this all turns out in the end. Don't try the reader's patience by just narrating processes undertaken or decisions discussed or facts or the highways and byways. Some people do that in order to bury the point. Begin with the factual and evaluative conclusion and then go on to discuss it. You can go back and fill in contextual details and all that kind of stuff, but don't bury the important thing at the end. Okay, well, thank you for considering how we might fight against careless and unclear report writing in this episode of English with Matthew, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Take care.